Euthanasia presents a deeply complex moral question. Does the act of ending a life to relieve suffering cross a line that society should never permit? While compassion is often cited in its defense, can deliberately causing death ever be justified without undermining the very value we place on human life and dignity? We'll speak on that topic with our guest today, Mr. Alex Schadenberg, the Executive Director of the EPC, the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, an organization dedicated to protect those who are currently or will be facing euthanasia down the road in a variety of ways. Mr. Alex, welcome to the Weekend Connection.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you about these issues, even though they're very difficult issues to talk about.
Absolutely. And Mr. Alex, may I ask, how did you become so involved in fighting for euthanasia or these assisted suicide issues?
Yeah, I became involved in opposing euthanasia and assisted suicide in the 90s. So that's a long time ago. In fact, I've been working full-time on this issue for 26 years, since 1999. So it's quite an important issue to me. I got involved in this issue specifically because of the fact that I have an autistic son, and it was really more of an awareness that people with disabilities clearly are seen differently and have a different life experience. And so out of that, it got me sort of thinking about what would happen if euthanasia were legalized. Canada also is a little bit different. I'm Canadian, as you know. We were debating euthanasia already in the 90s because we had several court cases and different cases at around that time. So,
Alex, I can see on the EPC website that there is a well laid out list of purposes and goals for your for this organization. And for those listening, could you elaborate on what it is that the EPC wishes to achieve and how you do so?
Well, the difficulty is that euthanasia is now legal in Canada, so some of these things remain a focus, but they're not exactly the same sort of thing because we're still working to prevent euthanasia. So we are educational. We have a service component. We're involved politically. We're involved in multiple ways. We have a helpline that we work with. So there's quite a few things we do to work on this. But, previous to legalization and post-legalization, it does become different. But the focus remains the same, to prevent euthanasia. So what I'm referring to now is a lot of our, work is around how do we deal with somebody when we get a contact who wants euthanasia, and how do we convince them not to? How do we help people not die by euthanasia? How do we help them live until their natural death? These are sort of things that we are now really focused on and writing about and focusing on, as well as the awareness. A lot of people are really not aware what this is all about. So you did describe it correctly in the beginning. Euthanasia and assisted suicide are a little bit different, but euthanasia is about directly killing somebody. So when you legalize euthanasia, you're allowing your doctor or nurse practitioner, which is how it works in Canada, to kill you by lethal drugs. You might ask for it, that's correct, but they're actually doing the act. Whereas in assisted suicide, it's very similar to that, where the doctor or nurse practitioner would then prescribe you the lethal drugs, but you have to take it yourself. So those are the differences about how it's done. Nonetheless, this is about killing, and I am opposed to killing people, and there's a lot of people who are opposed to killing people. We recognize how this has affected the culture now that we allow doctors and nurse practitioners to kill people in Canada.
Yes, and we are speaking with Mr. Alex Schadenberg, the Executive Director of the EPC, the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. And you were mentioning that some of the current issues involved in Canada, how it's legal. Is there any other sort of current undergoing process that you are involved in?
Well, there's multiple things, but in my own country, in Canada, and I'm involved also internationally, I've become, by my years of involvement, I've become sort of like an international expert on these issues. But nonetheless, in our own country, there's the whole issue of euthanasia for mental illness alone. So in Canada, when they originally legalized euthanasia, you had to have a type of a terminal condition. In law, we've removed that in 2021, so people don't need to be terminally ill in Canada to die by lethal injection from their doctor or nurse practitioner. They need to have an irremediable medical condition, so in other words, a long-term medical condition. It does not need to be terminal in any way in order to die by euthanasia in Canada. But also the question of euthanasia for mental illness alone. So when we expanded the law in Canada in 2021, they included euthanasia for mental illness alone, but then they said we're going to delay that until we're ready for it. So it's been delayed several times now. So right now, as of March of 2027, the Canadian government will implement euthanasia based on mental illness. So these people might have no physical issues whatsoever, clearly not terminally ill, but have had long-term mental health issues.
Are you seeing a shift in public view regarding these issues? The more that you are able to talk about it, the more that you are able to spread the word, are you seeing any change in your efforts?
Well, what we have seen is that the culture has become more, how would you say, programmed or accepting of euthanasia with the more deaths that we're having. So the greater number of deaths has led to more acceptance of it. Now, in the same way, we have been talking about these issues. We find that when we tell the stories of actual people who have been affected by a euthanasia death, so let's say somebody who has a disability who asked for euthanasia not based on terminal illness and not based on suffering per se, but often based on issues related to poverty, social inequality, difficulties receiving health care, issues around homelessness and things like that. There's been quite a few stories in our country about these people being approved for euthanasia and some of them dying by euthanasia. That these stories have actually created a sort of a pushback within the culture where people are saying, well, I actually, support euthanasia, but I don't support what we're doing. And this is what we're seeing. Now, why do people support euthanasia? Well, they tend to support it based on a fear of a bad death. And part of that is how the culture has conditioned people to think that they have two choices. They can have a euthanasia death or they can have a bad death. That's how they're conditioning people to think. And in fact, it's not true at all. It's far from being true. In fact, most people do not have a terrible death. And even if there are difficult conditions, with the proper care, there is no need to even talk about this concept about killing somebody. But, the pro-killing crowd wanted to create a dichotomy within the culture to make you think that you needed to have euthanasia in order to have what they would say is a peaceful death. So this is the kind of thing that's happened. So anyway, the story model, the talking about these stories has been very powerful and has actually created a pushback on the issue.
We can see that it is a big issue. Obviously, you wouldn't be working in this organization if it wasn't a big issue. But I was wondering if you had any data that indicates of the true scale, how many people are being affected by euthanasia?
Okay, so the 2023 data in Canada showed that we had about 4.3% of all deaths were euthanasia in Canada. The 2024 data is not out yet from the federal government, but I've done some number crunching, and it looks to be more like 4.8% of all deaths were in 2024. So the numbers went up again quite significantly in 2024, and obviously right now, this is August of 2025. So we've seen this consistent growth in the number of deaths, and this is a great concern. But it's not only the growth in the number of deaths, as bad as that is, it's the type of deaths. So in the beginning, people tended to be somebody who had a terminal condition. They tended to be nearing death. They weren't always nearing death, but they tended to be terminally ill and approaching death. Today, it's a very different sort of situation. We get situations around couple euthanasia, meaning that one of, let's say somebody's been married 50 years or et cetera, and this person is approaching death. They then have their spouse join them, and their spouse die at the same time together, and they make this into a romantic thing. So killing becomes romantic. And these are the kind of things that are starting to get mixed in. We've had the issues around veterans. What do you mean by veterans? Well, we've had veterans going through significant mental health issues like PTSD, etc. Traumatic stress from serving in our country, and being in Afghanistan, for instance, was a big factor in this. And they're being told, well, have you considered MAID, euthanasia? Have you considered this when they're seeking help? So you get this sort of concept of the normalization of killing that really changes healthcare. When you normalize killing, that changes everything, and that's what we're seeing a lot of today.
Yeah, and that normalization of something that really should not be the normal, that is a scary thing to be able to see. And when you were saying that 4.8% was that the statistic for Canada? Was that correct?
Yeah, that would be the Canadian data. And as you would know, obviously that varies across the country. Because
Yeah.
in 2024, there was 7.7% of all deaths in Quebec, which is, a province in Canada, were euthanasia. So Quebec had by far the highest rate in the country. So you get this major differentiation based on where you live. And Quebec is really pushing hard to normalize euthanasia. So we go back to the basics here again, because a lot of people, even listening to this show, might say, yes, but, I wouldn't want to have a terrible death. And I understand that completely. I understand. I'm not interested in dying a terrible death either. But the point of it is that you don't need to kill somebody in order to have a good death. That's the first thing. Secondly, this is about killing. People want to, in Canada we call it MAID now. That's what the government and all the agencies call it, MAID, which is medical assistance in dying. But they came up with this term MAID, which is a Made in Canada term, to make you feel good about it, to help you forget about what this actually is. It's never acceptable to be killing people. It's just not. And once you start killing people, what is the outcome of that? And this is what we're experiencing more and more in Canada, this whole change in the attitude towards people who have vulnerable conditions, but also the attitude of normalization of killing. It's pretty serious and negative into the culture itself.
Absolutely. Again, this is Alex Schadenberg, our guest today, the Executive Director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. Mr. Alex, what resources would you say would help our listeners learn more about these laws, these issues, like MAID?
Well, the best resource on this issue is actually my blog. So if you go to the website, you will notice on the website that you have to scroll down a tiny bit. It says the EPC blog. I've been maintaining this blog since 2007. It is the world's most comprehensive source of information on these issues. So if you want to know about what's going on in your own country, your own state, your own region, whatever, or if you want to know about something historically, how we got to where we're at, all the information is there. The problem with, of course, blogs is all these different articles. But the nice thing is that you can, the sidebar is annotated by topic, so it's easy to find things. The other thing is there's a charity that we work with called Compassionate Community Care. So if you can Google Compassionate Community Care, it's a charity that helps to visit people. It has a helpline dealing with euthanasia issues. It also deals with advocacy issues and issues around people going through difficult times in their life. So what we've been advocating more than anything else is we've been saying to people, one of the problems in the culture is that we have an incredible amount of loneliness in the culture. And that is something that's been coming on for a long time, where the culture has become very, individualistic oriented. It's about, the me and the I. What that has resulted in is a lot of people who are going through difficult health problems, and they're doing so alone, and they're lonely, and sometimes death starts seeming to be the better answer when in fact it's clearly not. So you can understand how a human person reacts when they're going through a very difficult health condition, and now they also seem to be alone and lonely and abandoned within the culture. I urge people to get far more involved with visiting their friends and their families and being with them, because, as human beings, we need the other. We need to be with the other. We need the other. That's one of the biggest ways of preventing this concept of suicide, euthanasia, and assisted suicide. It's the whole caring for the individual and recognizing the nature of the human person as needing you to be with them.
Mr. Alex, if there's anything that we haven't covered that you'd like our listeners to know, that any other piece of information that we should walk away with, what would it be?
This is a worldwide phenomenon now, and a lot of people haven't become aware of the great threat that this is to your life and to my life. And I say that clearly because it is also a threat to my life. Not that someone's going to impose this on me, but because I'm human. I've already mentioned that it's very difficult for a human person to go through difficult health conditions and do so alone. They feel abandoned. It's very difficult to deal with any issues related to emotional and psychological and physical pain if you're alone. It's very difficult. And yet we have this more than ever before within the culture. So I keep reminding people, as a human being, not only do you need to be with others, you have to recognize that we need to protect the other. We need to care for the other. We need to also recognize that as a human being, I am threatened by this because I might go through a difficult time in my life, and just like you might, like we all will experience difficult times, and sometimes we lose our ability to truly understand the purpose for our life. And it's not that we're terrible people. It's just that as a human being, sometimes you get darkened in your days, right? You have a hard time seeing beyond what you're experiencing.
Well, Mr. Schadenberg, thank you so much for joining us today for this important topic.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all for today's Weekend Connection. Weekend Connection airs every Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern and covers topics of our society just like the one we talked about today.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.